Okay, so the easiest way, I think, to launch things into Capture One, I'm just going to find a different folder because I've already got the one that's going on right now. But if you click on the session folder and you look at this preference file right here, this is also how you launch. And if you're in Capture One already, so I mean, just double clicking on this will do it, or if, I don't know, does drag and drop work in Windows? In Macintosh, anyway, you can drag this preference file onto the Capture One icon, whatever. That will also load it. But if you're in Capture One and you want to start a session that's not in your most recent ones, so again, remember in the library here in this little drop-down menu, this remembers recent ones that you've actually done, allows you to kind of go back and forth. But if you can't remember, anyway, to open another one, you can also come up to the File menu and you come down to Open. And then in Open, again, I'm just going to go to a Capture One, a recent session. Again, this is the file, this preference file for the entire session is the one that you click on to actually open it up. So, but in that case, it doesn't really matter. I'm already open. Help is on the way. This one right here. Okay, back into Capture One. Okay, your ordering might be slightly different than mine. I've done a sort by name. Again, if you come up to these two little arrows at the very top of the thumbnails part, click on it. This will actually give you everything that you can sort by. So, and it really, if there was other information in here, like if we had geotagged these things or something like that, there's a good, don't quote me on this, but there's a good likelihood that that would show up as a category in here. But anyway, I'm going to just do mine by name. I don't think we've actually renamed any of ours, but you'll see when I just clicked on name, it actually, my whole list of thumbnails just changed. The reason that happened is that if you repeatedly click on something, you get the reverse order. So I clicked on name a second time and you'll see it puts a check mark near this reverse. If you uncheck that part, it'll go back to the way it originally was. So it's just when you're doing it by name or by date, it'll go from, for instance, if we're doing it by date, it would be oldest to newest. And if you click on the reverse, it goes newest to oldest. So anyway, it's just so you guys understand what's going on there. So taking a look at our folders across the very top, the thing that we started with and that we've actually gotten through was we got through the whole library part. We got through doing filters and sorting and building collections and doing smart session favorites, which are really subfolders. And we got through all of that part a few weeks ago. Then in the tethered capture part, this is all about camera settings. So these two things are all these are the first two of those, the library and the tether, are all about capturing your images. So in many cases, that's all most photographers ever know. Most photographers do not continue, not most, that's not fair to say. A number of photographers do not continue to do the work here in Capture One. They actually will bring their stuff into Photoshop and they'll do it there, which is unfortunate because Capture One actually has got some ways to actually deal with processing files that are, in my opinion, superior to Photoshop. But there's still things in Photoshop that are superior to Capture One. So for instance, in Capture One, there are adjustment layers, but they're not image. There's also kind of an image layer thing. But the thing you need to remember about Capture One is that it never becomes a baked file. It's always a raw file, and you're always simply developing. You're already always So when we do, like, we're going to go in and work on color, we're going to work on exposure, we're going to do those sorts of things today. But all we are really developing is a recipe for how to process Capture One. Or a file in Capture One. It doesn't really change the file, which is very different than in Photoshop. Once you actually get out of Camera Raw and you get into Photoshop, that is a baked file, and that's something where you can cut and copy pixels. You can change pixels. You can, you can do all of that kind of stuff. You can't do that really in Capture One. You can do kind of an illusion. Capture One has a limited version of like clone stamping and that kind of stuff. For me, again, it's not the place that I really do that stuff. But if you were to do full-on blown compositing, that kind of stuff, you simply can't do that kind of work in Capture One. So for us, moving on to the right, we're going to just start to go through them. Some of the things we're going to stick to pretty closely. Some of them we're going to blow through pretty quickly. They're highly specialized. Things that you can actually do yourself. But at any rate, we are going to move on to the next tab over, and the next tab over is Shape. So in Shape, this is actually where you could do cropping. This is also where you can rotate stuff. This is where you can do keystoning. Is actually, if we take a look at keystoning, what keystoning really is all about is if you've got, for instance, the classic example of this is you've photographed a building and the building gets narrower as you go up higher to the top. So that's just, it's a perspective thing. Unless you use a view camera, that's always going to be the case. So it's a way to then change that so that the building doesn't grow narrower as you go up to the top. You can actually correct that part. So you can do all sorts of things like that. Again, my personal feeling is that this makes more sense to do this stuff in Photoshop than it actually does into Capture One. But I just wanted to make you guys aware of this. Capture One is so it's such a complete program, and it's so deep. There's no way we're going to hit on every single thing, so I want to really deal with more of the major things in here. But I simply wanted to point this part out. It's a way to actually look at it and think about these things. Style, the next thing over. In styles, we can actually, this matters a little bit more. So what happens in styles is that if you do a same thing in Capture One over and over and over again, let's say you do a certain look, like you love to boost the contrast of your images and you love to desaturate them as well. You can build that into a style so that you do not have to go in every single time and change every single file to actually do that part. We will come back to styles a little bit at the end if we actually have the time to do it. What I really care about though is the next one over, and the next one over there is adjustments. So once we get over to adjustments, if we have our standard version, if you haven't gone in here and changed and added any tools or moved any tools around, whatever, at the very top we've got a histogram. Again, histogram is pretty worthless to me. So in this case, if you take a look at the histogram, I've just picked the image of me. If you want to scroll down, I'm down here somewhere in this. If you simply want to click on that image, this is the version of me. You'll see that this spikes, the histogram is spiking in the highlight range right here. And it's simply because I've got a whole big old area of my image, this background wall and the parking lot floor underneath it, whatever. This is all, it's all highlights. So it's in some ways it's misleading, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I care a lot more about what I'm seeing on screen, and you guys already know how I feel about using color cards and this stuff. I live and die by that. So again, I don't really find a lot of use for histogram. Layers and masks we are going to use today. Under layers and masks, again, you'll see everything is sort of, you can collapse things, you can open things up. As we continue to our way down, you will actually see that there is style brush, smart adjustments, white balance. Again, the style brush and the smart adjustments we're going to stay away from right now. White balance we will actually take a look at. This is the same tool that exists in the capture, in the tethered version of this. So in tethered, you know, when we actually get a camera up in here, there's that little icon that sits over there that's the eyedropper tool. That's the same thing as the white balance tool. And if you look down through here, it's really funny. I'm looking up at the screen the whole time trying to do this, and it's like, well, it's right in front of you. So anyway, I don't have white balance in here right now. It doesn't look like, and it also doesn't look like I have exposure in here. I could add those things if I wanted to. So if I wanted to add exposure to this group, I can simply Control-click on the tool tab that's up at the top. Say I want to add a tool, and then I could add exposure for this, EXP. And you'll see now I've got exposure sitting right here. So again, you can modify all of these things to your heart content. Remember, over at the very far, I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit all over the place right now, but I just want to make sure everybody catches this part. If you go all the way over to the, you'll see here, there's two tabs that are missing. There's a refine tool and a metadata tool that I don't see over here. But if I control click on this, I can actually add another tool tab, and I can add a custom tool tab, and this is what a lot of digital techs I know actually do. So if you add a custom, you can do this with me right now because we can always undo it. So to do this, click on the little three dots. If you've got enough screen real estate, you may not, it'll just be further over. You might have the refine and metadata already showing in here. Doesn't matter. We're just going to add, again, a tool tab, and I'm going to add a custom one, and I'm going to name it Verser tool tab. You would name yours, obviously yours. You can click in this drop-down menu and you can pick any of these. There's a series of pre-canned icons in here. Unfortunately, you can't design your own, but since I am number one, I'm going to pick number one. And I'm going to simply click on Add Tool tab, and you see you come up with a blank set right here. And then we can build out the one that you might want to actually have here. So again, if you hover over this empty space, hold down the control key, click and add tool. I'm going to start right off the bat by adding a camera tool. I definitely want to work with that. I'm going to click and add another tool underneath that, and I'm going to kind of go down through these guys. I don't need any of this. I don't need this. I'm not going to do color here. I don't crop here. I'm not going to do any of those. I'm not going to do any of my export stuff here. I'm not going to do any of that. Again, exposure, I am going to add that because this allows me, again, you guys know this about me already if you've seen me shoot. I will really quickly go in. If I shoot a picture of a color card and it seems really underexposed, I'll do a quick exposure adjustment just to get some rough idea about how much power I need to add. Then I'll zero the exposure adjustment in software out and then add it on a power pack. So let's say I get a really dark exposure. Well, here, let's try one of these right here. I don't know what the exposure is going to be. To zoom in on something like this, again, I just clicked a second one of these frames. If you can find the same one, great. If not, find any other one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to hold down my space bar, double click really quickly. It'll allow me to zoom in on this. And then I can grab up here in the tool tab up at the very top. I'm going to grab, again, the eyedropper tool and make sure that I'm doing white balance. Make sure that this is color neutral and hover over this. And you can see I'm reading a 205 in my luminosity up at the very top. Well, if I want to see what it's really, again, a really quick rough idea about the exposure that I should be changing, I can take this exposure slider and I'm going to kick it up a full stop. So that would be basically a one-stop exposure right there, one stop. Hover over this again, it's still at 237. It's not quite enough. So I'll try stop and a third. Hover over this, it's a 243. So it's letting me know I'm about a stop and a half off. So about a stop and a half off gets me sooner or later into the range that I want. And that way, it's just a faster way of doing it. Now, shooting available light, again, I've got a light meter. I should be able to dial this in quicker and faster than that. Where this really comes into play is when you're in the studio and you've got a power pack, let's say it's set at 800 watt seconds, and you're saying to yourself, well, how I need a stop and a half more. That gives you some idea about how to change either your ISO, or if you're at 800 watt seconds, one stop more would be another 800 watt seconds. That would get me to 16. Half of that, again, would be what? You won't see this on the video. You may not even hear it. But really quickly, this part matters. So I'm going to pause the video because that's just annoying for people to have to live through this. So hang on one second. One downside to this, something to keep in mind because this can really bite you in the ass. So I warn everybody about this part. So let's say I crank this thing up to 1 + 1.5 stops, and it's like, oh yeah, this is great. And then I do not reset the exposure. It's going to stick. And then if I actually do say bump my ISO, you know, a stop and a half or whatever, then it's a double hit. I actually have changed, I've added a stop and a half in my camera, but I've also got a stop and a half going in software, and it will screw you up because in reality that will appear to be a 3-stop difference, and in reality it will not be. Okay, so anyway, you can build your own thing here. So continuing to build on in here, I would add a couple of more tools in here. I would actually add white balance, which is down here. I would also add focus, which is right here. So these are the kind of things that I really care about having the whole time. I want to see my camera part. Once I get my exposure part, I don't need to keep that part open, and I don't really need to keep my white balance open unless I want to modify it. Because again, remember, your camera is going to have this little eyedropper icon on it. So to get back to that all the time, you don't need to worry about that. There is also a version of that. If you click on it right up here, this is the very same tool up at the very top. If you click on this eyedropper and pull this, you can see at the very top there's a white balance tool. There are also sticky color readouts here. Now people use these all the time, especially, so when I was working for Nike, Nike used to have studios, and they had 6 studios all across the world. So they had a studio here in Chicago, they had one in Seattle, they had one in Malaysia, they had one in Ireland, they had them all over the place. And they would send out reference files so that everybody would shoot the exact same lighting. So you would get this lighting diagram. You would actually get a capture, it would be a Capture One session, and you would open it up and it had color sampler points all over the place. So to see what I mean by that, if you actually click on this eyedropper drop down and you come down to almost the very bottom one, not the exact bottom one, but where it says add color readout, you can actually then put down a color sampler right here, and it will give you a readout that stays with this file. Now if you go to a different file, that readout still stays there. It doesn't move around. So anyway, you can move them around. So again, as long as you've still got that tool selected, you can actually just move it around. You can click and you'll see it changes its orientation to try to make it easier for you to sort of like see what's going on. But this is a way that I could put one down. You'll see I'm getting a 232 in my luminosity right here. So instead of having to go back over and over and over and get to this point, you can just put down readouts. So anyway, I would get a file, and there would be like 5 or 6 readouts on the background. There would be 2 or 3 readouts on the figure. It would be all of that, and your job to light that was to match the lighting of all that based on these readout numbers, and that's how they would actually give you lighting diagrams. So you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff. To get rid of these, you go back up to that very same menu all the way down to the bottom to delete color readout, and then click on this and you can actually get rid of it. So those are the things that I would build possibly into my own menu, but only again for tethered capturing. And then you could build another menu, another custom menu that would be for your editing style or whatever, or you simply, again, set these the way you really like them, all of the tabs, every single one of them, and then simply come up to the window menu, down to workspace, and then you want to save that workspace. Once you save the workspace, you can actually go into the preference folder. There's a PDF on our website that shows you exactly where these things are kept. I can show you where the one in Macintosh is kept. So if we go into, again, the library folder for the user, this is my library folder, not the system-wide library folder, but my personal user folder. Come down to the preferences folder. In the preferences folder, we're going to come down looking for Capture One, and I'm hoping it's in here. It's either, if it's not in here, there's only 2 places that you'll find this stuff like forever. You'll find it in application support, and you'll find it actually in preference folder. And instead of me going through all of this right now, I will find this during our break, and I'll come back and I'll tell you guys where it is. So it's either in this preference folder right here, or if you go up to the very top of the library, there's an application support folder right here, and it'll actually be in here. Actually, this is where it is. Capture One's folder, it's right here. And then you'll see down here workspaces. This is where your personal workspaces actually get saved. Copy this to your hard drive. And then any time you go to another computer, so if you go to a rental studio as a tech, or if you go to some other photographer's studio, all you need to do is drop your personal workspace into this, and then go up to the menu right here, the workspace, and you'll see your version of it right in here. It'll be like, you'll see right here, I've got 3 of them in here. This is my tethered workspace. This is one that I made just to throw away, and then there's another just general workspace right here. So anyway, that's the way you should think about doing that kind of stuff. It saves you time. If you go into a photo studio, you're up and running with your own completely tricked out workspace without having to build it and take the half hour it'll take to do that. Any questions about this part? Okay. So I am going to go back to the adjustment tab right here, and we're going to continue to actually look through part of this. I want to make sure that everything else is here. So we got past, again, we're not going to look at style brushes or adjustments right now. We already know what white balance is, so I'm going to collapse that guy. Exposure, it is the same thing here, but while we're on exposure, I want to speak to you about this part right here. The thing about saturation and exposure is going to be different than saturation in the color editor. If you come down to the color editor and open it up, you will see that there is a saturation adjustment right here. And you would think that this saturation adjustment would be the same as this one that's up here in exposure. They are not. If you take the one that's up in exposure, and I'm going to leave this color card on here, but just because it's got a number of color cards on, it's got a lot of colors on it, so it's just easier to see when we do a saturation move for this. So again, I'm going to hold down my space bar alone to get the hand, which will allow me to reposition this. Again, if you want to zoom in, you double click to zoom into this right here, holding the space bar. If I double click again, it zooms back out. Whatever you double click on is what it zooms into. I'm going to double click and go back out, and then I'm going to come right in here to the space bar. Everybody do this with me, please. I want you to have two images open. So I'm going to hold the space bar, double click to kick it back out. I want you to just hold down the command key to click and have two images open. If you do not see two images open, it's because you do not have this little icon up in the top left-hand corner of this set. If you've got something like this set, anyway, you need them. Oh, that's it. If you just turn this guy off. If you turn this off, even though you've got two selected, you don't see two of them. You got to make sure you have the multiple one on here. But now if you hold down the space bar and double click on the color card, you'll see you only zoom into one, double click again, and you go back out. But if you keep the space bar down and you add the shift key, you will double click and you will zoom in on both of them. If you continue to hold the shift key and the space bar, you move both of them around at the same time. If you let go of the shift key, you can move this one around, or you can come over and move this one around. So a lot of times when people are trying to really quickly make a distinction, they're trying to look at 6 or 7 faces all at the same time. If it's been sort of like the consistent shooting and you're really just looking for expression, this is a quick way to zoom in and you'll see all the faces will just fill in. If you got like 7 images selected, it'll just be the faces. Sometimes you'll have to move just one to see something a little bit better because your camera moved or they moved or that kind of stuff here. But it's just a very fast way to get in and out. With 2 images selected right now, you'll see that no matter what image you select, I'm going to hold down the space bar because I don't want to redo white balance. But if you move back and forth, you don't ever get rid of one of them. To get rid of one of them, to start over again, you simply need to click outside the edge of a thumbnail. So in the case of having vertical thumbnails like this, you want to click right on the side. If you've got horizontal thumbnails, there's not a lot of space on the side, but there will be spaces underneath the name. But if you simply click on the side, it will get rid of all the selections, and then you go back to the one that you actually want. So then going back to our exposure slider part right here, if you take this saturation slider here and crank it all the way to the right, you'll see that things saturate, but they don't go nuclear. So the saturation slider in the exposure slider here actually has guardrails on it. And what it'll do is, it works a little bit more like the vibrance tool in Photoshop instead of the saturation tool. It will tend to focus on colors that are not saturated, and it will saturate them more. And then the ones that are already saturated, it eases off on them. So again, it will skew more towards the unsaturated colors. It will boost those more. It won't take those. The saturation slider in the color editor will actually nuke this out. I mean, the saturation colors in here will become absolutely neon. So just something to keep in mind about that. All of these sliders, so for instance, I'm going to click and drag my exposure slider way up. If you'll do the same thing with me, this will actually help a lot. If you double click on that thing that we just did, the slider that we just pulled up, it will actually zero things back out. But let's say you do a whole lot of things. I'm going to do some weird contrast. I'm going to move everybody in here. It is a pain in the ass to go back and actually reset all of these. If you take a look at the top right across from the word that says exposure, You have 3 little dots, then you've got, again, what people are calling the hamburger, then you've got an arrow that points counterclockwise, then you've got a double-headed arrow, and then you've got a magic wand. We're going to go through all of these. You'll see that a lot of these have the very same thing. Some of them don't, though. Like the style brushes does not have any of this stuff. These things only populate for controls that you could actually use. So what they are is, the first one I'm going to pick is the one that's in the very middle, the arrow that points back. If you click on that, it will actually, or double click on this, or triple click on this. Oh wait, I'm doing the white balance one. The one for exposure, I really need to quit looking at this screen. Okay, the one that's for exposure, it resets everybody. But the difference in this, the thing that you need to know about this is this. So I'm going to do open up white balance and exposure both for me. I want you to take the Kelvin sliding and just crank it way over to the right. It makes your image really yellow. And then I want you to take your exposure and pull it down, and then I want you to boost the contrast way up. So now I've made adjustments in 2 different tools. I've made an adjustment in the white balance, and I've done one in the exposure. If you click on the reset for exposure, it does not impact the white balance at all. If you click on the reset for the white balance, it will actually rebalance the white balance. So I'm going to change this again like I just did. I'm going to make my exposure darker. I'm going to boost the contrast and change the white balance. If you want to change everything wholesale and get this back so that there are no color corrections at all, it's this same one up at the very top that looks like the big brother. It's the same icon as these little white arrows down here, but it's the big monster one. If you click on this, it resets everything in every single tool, my white balance has been changed on this, my custom white balance, all of that is gone. This is the raw image that has had no adjustment made to it. Now I still want to have a normal white balance on that, so I'm going to click on the white balance tool, the eyedropper, and I'm going to go back and click on this little icon, the gray patch that's right next to the red, and we're going to continue to move on. So the other things about this, if we look at the other options, so these little icons that are up at the very top, if you click on the little 3 dots, you can actually see that this will allow you to change defaults for this particular camera model. We don't really need to do that part. You can apply defaults. We haven't set any defaults yet, though, so this would be the ones that are done by either Capture One or by Canon, because it's a Canon camera. You can then move this tool to something else. You can remove the tool, and you can get online help. This online help is indispensable. If you are out in the field and you cannot get an internet connection on your computer, you can actually always use your phone and use your phone as a hotspot and then connect to this. The advantage of online help, you'll see if I'm just clicked on mine for this exposure tool, it takes you right to the exposure tool in the manual online, and it will explain everything about it. This is true for all of the tools, everything that's actually in Photoshop that has these 3 little dots. Click on that drop down. They used to, if you're using an older version of Photoshop, they used to have a little question mark. It was the same thing. So then so anyway, that's going through the little 3 dots. If we go to the hamburger part right here, the next one, the hamburger part actually has got styles in it. These are styles. So you can see this is an exposure compensation, a -1 stop, a exposure compensation +1 stop, a simple black and white high contrast. These are they're not changing the raw file. Again, the raw file cannot be changed. It can only be reprocessed. And so anyway, that's what's actually going on in here. These are you can make your own versions of these. So right now, if I said, for instance, I want to really crank my exposure up, I want to take the contrast up, and I want to kill the saturation. I want this is my look. It looks ugly as shit, I think, but I could just claim this is my art, and I could write a really clever artist statement. How many of you guys have tried using ChatGPT for an artist statement? Oh, yes, you should. So the thing I find about ChatGPT, what it's doing for me right now is I'll be writing something and I'll get, and then things will be going really well, pretty smooth, and then all of a sudden I get to a really clunky sentence and I can't, it gets the idea across what I'm trying to say, but it's so bad. So I copy the sentence, I go into ChatGPT, and I simply say rephrase and then paste in that sentence. And it's shocking how good it actually can clean up your language. So You may hear different from every other instructor in this school, but I am a huge believer if something helps you and makes it easier and more gets you more to the point quicker, jump on that shit. Anyway, but okay, this is going to be my look. I love this look. It's amazing. I love it. I want to use it, whatever. So I'm going to click on those little three, the hamburger thing, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to say, I want to save this as a custom preset. And I'm going to call this, it's going to say, well, what do you want to save? And you can pick. You could say, I've made 3 changes in this tool. But let's say I don't want to do the saturation change. I can unclick the saturation change right here and then still build a preset of the exposure and the contrast. But I want it to be all 3. So I'm going to click on Save. And I'm going to call this Versus Art Look. And then I can hit Save on this. And then when I go to another image, I'm going to go to the one right below it. I can actually go to that same image. I can click on this drop down and I can say Versus Art Look right here. And it applies it. Yeah. Also in that very same folder that I showed you in application support is where all your presets are saved. So if you've got some look that you really love and you want to actually are always going to do it, whatever, this is just a very fast, quick way to do this. So I said I wasn't going to get into styles, but there you go. I lied. So anyway, the next one over is the reset, but only for the tool that you're clicking on. So I'm going to reset that part. But again, when I reset that part, it got rid of my white balance. So I need to actually do my white. No, I take it back. I didn't get rid of my white balance because that's up in the next tool that's above this. So I'm good to go there. The next tool over. So this is a copy and paste thing. So I'm going to show you guys actually how to do this part. I'm going to go back up to this first image. I am going to reset this first image so it doesn't have all that wackiness on here. But we're going to do something really weird to this image. I want you to be able to see how this whole part works. So in changing this image right here, I'm going to do, again, I'm going to stay in my exposure. No, we'll do it in Kelvin here. So I'm going to click on my custom in my white balance tool. I'm going to make it extremely warm so you can see. I'm just trying to give you something where you can see the difference. So let's say now that you actually want to apply this to the image that's right underneath it. Well, you could select the image that's right underneath it and just crank the Kelvin over, but the faster way of doing it is to come up here to the very top of your toolbar. There is an arrow that points up. You want to click on that first. You'll notice that the arrow that's pointing down right now is grayed out. But when you click on the arrow that points up, it copies the adjustments that you have done to this image to the adjustment clipboard. Then you'll also notice that the down arrow is no longer inactive. It's actually become active. Now if we click on the image that's down below it and click on the down arrow, it applies that adjustment to this second image. Did that make sense to everyone? Okay, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that because I want to keep that image clean. I'm going to go back to the one that I had in the very beginning. We're going to modify this thing up at the very top. So the toolbar that runs along the very top, you can actually modify. And so to do that, if you hover over the toolbar, so I'm talking about the whole strip of tools that are on the very top. If you hold down the Control key, or if you're on a Windows, a right click will do the same thing. So again, in Macintosh, if you hold down the Control key and click, you'll get a drop-down menu. And in this drop-down menu, you can say that you want your tools up here to actually be icon and text. In this case, you can see there's a little text that is underneath it. These are the cursor tools. This is the auto adjustment tool. This is the reset tool. In the old days, it took them, literally, I swear to God, it took Capture One till about, they've had this icon and text forever. It never worked until like last year. So if you already know what all this shit's about and you don't like the clutter on your screen, you can click on icon only and it will get rid of all of those other things. It makes for a simpler interface, one I like actually a little bit better. But again, I know what these tools do. Then you can also click on this and come down and say you want to customize the toolbar. And when you say customize toolbar, you get this whole set of things. You can see that the toolbar now is showing you, it's like moving and shit. It's telling you that this is now, you can edit it. These blanks that you've got up in here are spacers. You can actually remove those. You simply click and drag something out. they're just used to center stuff, but if you want to start adding stuff in here or moving stuff around, that's how you do it. I'm going to hit Command Z. I can't bring that back, so I'm actually going to grab a flexible space and drag it back up into that part. And then again, you can edit these. You can make them wider or shorter. There is an auto tool here. I'm actually going to see if this will allow me to go back to icon and text really quickly. So let's see. It's not going to let me do that. So let me go really quickly, just so that you guys, if you don't know what these tools are, I want you to be able to at least see the writing on what they are. So again, I'm just going to bring that part back, customize my toolbar again. So this auto adjust, I think, is a worthless thing. And the reason I think it's worthless is that if you take a look right down here, every one of the tool panels has an auto adjustment next to it. And so again, I don't use auto adjust ever. So I would get rid of this part right here. You do have an undo and a redo. This is really just Command Z back and forth. You do have a reset, which you keep. Basically what I'm saying is I don't know that you really need this part, but nonetheless, we can leave it there for the time being. But one of the things that I think is missing out here, actually a couple things. One, the first one, I think this is the most important, is this one, this copy and apply. This takes that two-step process of copying adjustments and it turns it into a one-click movement. So I'm going to click on this copy and apply, and I typically put it right next to the up and down arrows because they do very similar things. Again, this is a one-step process, this is a two-step process, but it's the best place to actually have it, I think. Now, there's a grid up here that'll allow you to put a grid on your image. There's a before and after. I like both of those things, but what's missing up here is a focus mask. So if you grab this focus mask and drag it up here, what a focus mask will do is when you click on it, it will show you what Capture One believes to be in focus in your image. So it's a great way to check if eyes are in focus. It's a great way to check on depth of field. It's a great way to check on all of those things. So I actually like that, guy, so I put that up there. Reset we've already got, but one that we do not have in here is all right, oh wait, shit, I got to start looking at my screen. This right here, rotate. So if you click on rotate and you pull that up into here, I typically put it next to undo and redo. This is why I don't like undo and redo. It seems like really close to these icon-wise. But as long as we leave the names down there, we'll be good to go on that part. So anyway, all of these things you can change, you can add, you can put up there, you can do tooltips, you can do all of that kind of part. If for some reason you screw things up, you can actually, let's say you lose this whole thing up here at the top, you can grab this entire toolbar at the bottom and drag it up and it will give you the defaults all over again. So I'm going to hit done with this part right here. And to show you some of the things that I was actually talking about, I'm actually going to, I've got an image now that I've actually changed. It is my primary image. You can see it's got this solid white line around it. I'm going to select 3 other images. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select the 3rd image down. You can see I've got a 4 up going right now. But you'll also notice that the primary image still has the heavy white line around it. The others do not. If you then click on this copy and apply adjustment part right here, it will open up a screen and say, well, what do you want to copy and apply? The only change that I've made in here is white balance, but this will look at every possible thing that you could have done, and it will allow you to either check this on or uncheck it. But white balance is the only thing that I've done, so if I click, I'm going to leave it checked, and if I click apply to this, everything gets that same thing. It's just a faster way of doing this copy and paste adjustment layer part. So I'm going to go back now to my original image here. Again, if you select any of these others, it just goes around here. It doesn't unselect them. You need to, again, click out of this space to deselect, click back on a single image. So I'm going to click back on a single image, hold down the space bar to get this more centered, and then I'm going to click on my focus mask. And in the focus mask, the parts that you see in green are focused. This is what Capture One believes is focused. Basically, it's looking at contrast. What's happening in here, if you look at the eyes of this particular image, and you could say, well, the eyes look a little bit soft. My guess is that the eyes here, this is not a lack of focus, this is motion. So, but if you double click the hand to zip back out, you can see that this is where it's focusing. You can also see if this is really true, if it's not motion, then my camera is front focusing. It's probably trying to take the color card into account. but you can see it's the shoulders and the front part of her that's in focus. It's not the eyes. That would be a big warning. And you can leave this on, so if you've got a photographer who's shooting and you just want to make sure that they are that the images that they're doing are in focus, this is an aid. It's not perfect. It's an aid. Does this make sense to everyone? Are we good about this part? One piece of warning right here is that, let's say I'm teching Nathan, and all the rest of you are the creative team that have showed up from the ad agency, and Nathan is shooting away, and I say, Nathan, it's out of focus. That is a really bad thing to do in front of the entire creative team that's hired him to shoot these pictures. You carefully walk over and you settle up next to him and you actually whisper in his ear, you haven't had a thing in focus in the last 10 frames. Right? You need to be smart about that. Do not throw your photographer under the bus until you've actually worked with them for like 2 or 3 years and you are ready to steal that client, and then you throw his ass under the bus as fast as you can. And as you're leaving with the client, you make sure you're out in the parking lot with him, say, you know, I can do it cheaper than he can, and I can also have it in focus. Just saying. All right, are there questions about any of this? Are we pretty good on this part so far? Okay. I'm thinking right now is a good time for a break. Wouldn't you guys agree? Okay, so I've got 2:20. Let's make this a hard 10, be back at 2:30. Oh, okay, so one of the things that I think is missing in this default version of the adjustment tool tab is something I'm going to put in at the very top. I'm going to actually bring it up near this white balance group. I can move it if it doesn't land there. Typically now it's the photo Capture One has changed how this works. It used to be every time you would add a tool, it would put it at the very bottom of the tool tab stack. Now it's kind of puts it in the middle. So I'm not sure if that changes if we make this the middle, if it'll put it in here. So, but anyway, that's kind of seems what's happening. It doesn't matter. You can move these things wherever you want them to. So I am going to add another tool to this tool tab. So again, come up to the adjustment menu, hold down the control key, click on this. Say you want to add a tool, and we're going to add base characteristics. This one's pretty critical, and people gloss over it, and I'm not one of those because, again, there's an issue that happens in all of this, and it's something that I want to show to you right now. So when you open up base characteristics, what this is that if we go back and take a look at our tether tab right here, you can see in our tether tab that under next capture adjustments, this is where it takes profiles, and the default for this is that it inherits the ICC profile from the image that you just previously have shot. So if I've been shooting and I've got this, again, it looks at its default. I do have an image that's going right here. So again, it'll know what the profile actually is. So anyway, but it's the ICC profile. This is all about the next capture. This has got nothing to do with what's already been captured. So if I want to change the ICC profile of this, if for some reason it's the wrong one, I can't do it in next capture adjustment. That is only about captures that are going to happen in the future. So that's not what I'm looking to do. So if I go back to my adjustment one here and I go into base characteristics, this is where you can change the profile. So if you click on this drop-down menu, it knows from the metadata that this is shot with a Canon EOS 5D Mark III. It knows that, so it applies this profile. However, if you take a look in the Canon group right here and you find the EOS 5D Mark IIIs, you will actually see, let me find it, 5D Mark III right here. There's two of them. There's a generic one, which is the one that's been applied to this, and then there's one called Pro Standard. Pro Standard is the most recent version of profiles generated by Phase One or Capture One for Canon, for this Canon camera. And there's a Pro Standard for all of these cameras. So it's not just Canon, it's for Leicas and Leafs and Miyas and Fujis, and it's for everybody. So this matters because this will change the look of your image. again, we have made custom profiles in this class. This would be a way that you could actually use a custom profile. Now the problem with that is that we have not made ICC profiles in this class. What we have made is a custom DNG profile, which is what you need to use in Camera Raw and Photoshop. Camera Raw does not take ICC profiles. It only takes DNG profiles. The reverse is true of Capture One. Capture One does not take DNG profiles. It only takes ICC profiles. You can use the exact same color card to build both. You can build one for Camera Raw and use the very same image to build one for Capture One. We are not going to go through that process today, right now, because it takes too long and I got too much to get through. But if you go to our website, if you go to our website, under our resources for session 12, that's the session that we're into today. In session 12, under resources, at the very bottom, there is a color checker software ICC workflow. If you double click this and take a look at it, this will walk you through all the steps that you need. Again, you've already shot the color card. You will bring this into Capture One. You need to generate a TIFF file, a 16-bit TIFF file. Then as you start to go down here, you'll see it'll talk you all the way through it, everything that's supposed to happen, how you save it, where it goes, and then how you can actually load that into Capture One and use the custom profile in Capture One. This part's important. So again, if you are working in, it's all controlled up here at the very top. You remember when we made those ICC profiles, I pointed out that it was a DNG and then there was a dual illuminate DNG and then this ICC profile. That's where this whole thing takes place. So again, if you're going to do this kind of work, my strong suggestion is that if you're doing final color work here in Capture One, that matters and it's something that you should actually build. Okay, the next and last thing in here, you'll see that there is a curve in here. This is a contrast curve. This is set to auto. There is also a curve that will give you extra shadow detail, one that'll do high contrast, one that'll do film standard, and one that'll do a linear response. You don't want to use any of these except for auto. This is not the place to increase your shadow detail because this is a curve on here. And again, it gets buried in this ICC profile base characteristics thing. That is very different than using this high dynamic range down here, which is where you really should be opening your shadows up if you need to open up that detail here. So I do not touch this. The reason this exists is, for instance, this thing that says linear response, this removes any contrast curve at all. This doesn't really apply to people who are doing pictorial work like we do. This is primarily used by people who do electron microscopy. So if you are doing scientific work, you do not want a contrast curve of anything put on your raw data. You want to bring your raw data in and develop it yourself. So this is designed for people like that. We would never use this, not unless you are looking for a world of hurt and pain. So simply leave this as auto. But the last thing down here, if you guys have opened this up, do you also have a Capture One 12 engine, color engine? Does everybody have this? Does anybody have this? What this means is that when this file was originally shot and brought into Capture One, I was using Capture One 12 when this image was actually made. So I'm in version 23 right now. It is the single thing that changes most from one version of Capture One to the next is the color processing engine. It's how it's actually taking the raw data and processing it into something that we can actually see and treat as a full color image file. So this matters. The problem is, watch what happens. I'm going to upgrade mine right now. I'm going to click on this upgrade. It's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? And it should be giving you this whole thing. It'll say, it'll provide the best quality. Your settings will be permanently upgraded for this variant, and you will not be able to downgrade this. That is problematic for me, because maybe I like the version in 12 better. So to get around that, I want everyone to do this. You need to hover, so you need to have an image selected. You need to have this base characteristics open. You're going to hover over your image and you're going to hold down the control key, or if you have a 2-button mouse, right click. You will get a drop-down menu, and in this drop-down menu there's 2 things that you can actually do in this that matter, what I'm going to talk about right now. So let me find out where they are. It's up sort of at the very top, right under the battery name. There is new variant and clone variant. If we do new variant, what it will do is it will create a copy of it. It doesn't create a new copy of the raw data, but it creates a new thumbnail and preview of the raw data. It's still the same raw data, but the preview is different. So new variant will actually do one. Well, let's just click on new variant. You'll see what happens. So if you click on new variant, what ends up happening is it creates a copy of it, but it removes all of the adjustments that we have made. So you will also, if you take a look at your thumbnails, you will see that there's a 1 sitting up at the top of one and a 2 sitting right next to it. These are just 2 different previews of the exact same raw data. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? But it also removes things like, you'll see the color, the star rating is gone. It gets rid of all of those things. That's what a new variant actually does. So it's a great way if you want to really quickly get a preview of what you have done. We've now got a new variant. You can hold down your command key and click, and you can say, this is now my before and after. This is what it looked like with nothing done to it. This is where we are right now. Does that kind of make sense? So that part works out pretty well. To get rid of this second variant, again, I would click outside this, so I don't want to hit the delete key with 2 of them visible. I'm going to click on this guy again, and I'm simply going to hit my delete key. And you'll see it brings up this warning and says, do you want to delete this variant? And I'm going to say yes. I want you to remove it from this document. You'll notice now that you've still got the first one. It's lost its number 1 up here, but it's still sitting there, so everything is good to go. If you do the other one, so hold down your control key again and click and get a drop down and do a clone variant, this gives you a copy that's got everything that you did to the very first one. So now these are identical, but the advantage to this is that you'll see that again, if I go back up to my number 1, it's got this Capture One 12 engine. If I come down to my number 2 and click on this and say upgrade, and say, yep, you can go ahead and upgrade this one. It is now upgraded this variant, my number 2 variant, to the Capture 2021 color engine. But if I go back to my original one, this is still the Capture One 12 color engine. You can then hold down the command key and click on them, and you can compare the 2. Look at how much the shadows are open in this one right here compared to what they are in this image right here. This is pretty radically different in my book. So this is a way to say, okay, I want to compare this upgrade. I happen to like, you could say, I'm not saying this, but I'm just saying, you could say, I like the engine number 12 better. So in that case, you would simply get rid of this number 2 version, hit the delete key and say remove, but you have not lost the version of Capture One 12 engine color. Does this make sense to everyone? This starts to get to be really important, guys. Again, this is the depth and the, I would love to say there's an easier way around this. If you're looking for the easier way, is see this thing right over here. You come up to your the menu up at the very top again, hold down the control key, click on this, come down to customize toolbar, grab the auto adjust magic wand, put it up here, let go of it, hit the magic wand with all of your images and go home. I'm really not suggesting you guys do that. In a really big way, I'm suggesting you don't do that. Okay, so that gets us through white balance, that gets us through color, base color in here. Actually, it looks like I've lost, oh, here's my base characteristics right here. Remember I told you you can move these things around? I've just collapsed base characteristics. If you click on the top of the tool tab itself, you can move this anywhere you want to. You can move it up in the top of the stack, you can move it down in the stack. I typically keep it right next to color balance because that's what impacts it. We've gone through white balance here. Exposure is pretty clear and cut. It's, again, you're adding exposure, it's brightening everything up. but there's a difference. There's something you need to know. So if you think about exposure, if you are going, let's say you're actually shooting and you go from f8 to f11, you've dropped the exposure by a full stop, but that's dropped everything. It takes the entire dynamic range of your image and it lowers everything. So your highlights are lowered by a stop, your quarter tones are lowered by a stop, your mid-tones lowered by a stop, your three-quarters tones lowered by a stop, and your shadows are all lowered. They all are lowered by one stop equally. That is very different than brightness. So I'm going to double click on this to get out of that. Brightness tends to focus on the mid-tones, and it pushes the mid-tones up or down, but it tends to leave the white point and the black point alone. It tends to not go after those as much. So it's a little bit easier. You'll see I'm not blowing out my I'm not blowing out my highlights as badly here when I push this up. I'm not burying my shadows as much as I do it right here. Unlike exposure, which will completely nuke out my highlight. This is just gone, or actually bury my shadows. So again, it's just the difference in the two. Contrast, you guys all know what contrast is. It's basically taking the midpoint and pushing it towards both ends. So you take the single midtones and you start to push them towards the highlights and the shadows both. You can bury both of the highlights and shadows in doing that. And then we've already talked about saturation here. This is much more closely related to vibrance in Photoshop. It's, again, it tends to go after less saturated colors. It lays off saturated colors and tends to boost unsaturated colors more. If you go back up to the image of me standing in the parking lot and click on this one, you can actually see I want to get this back to its default. So to do that, click on the reset button up at the very top. You'll actually see there's a part that gets brighter. If you click on your exposure warning, it's the little triangle thing shaped up at the very top. If you click on this, you will actually see, in my case, things turn red. Well, we need to make sure that we've got this thing set correctly, because your exposure warning, what it's doing is it's showing you where Capture One believes that you are blowing out your highlights in this case. If it believes you're blocking up your shadows, that will show up as blue. So again, if you want to see what that looks like, take your exposure slider and bury this thing down, and you will see that that red goes away because I've lowered my exposure. It's brought in my highlights, but now all of these shadows that are blocking up down here on the sides are being flagged by blue. So if you double click on this to get back out, if your blue did not show up, it's because by default Capture One does not enable shadow warning in your exposure warning. To get that, you want to come up to the Capture One menu, come down to Preferences. On newer Macintoshes, this will be called Settings. Open this up, click on Exposure, click on the check mark to enable shadow warning. I typically set my shadow warning at 15 because anything below 15 will have trouble printing. So, and then I set my highlight warning at 250. Why? Why not 255? Say what? For me, it's a warning that shows me where I'm going to lose detail, right? So this is a more legitimate version. Setting my shadow warning at 15, anything that gets flagged in blue, I know will not print. It'll just go black. But also, the same token, anything that's above that 250, I know is going to be blown out, and I'm not going to have any detail in it. That's why we set when we're using that color, we actually try to set it to actually hit that 245 to 250. So this is now set correctly for me. You can change other things in here as well. Some of the things, this is a great place you should actually, so maybe get into settings, Darius, if you want. If you click on camera right here, this is where people will fuck a lot of stuff up. So this is a place, and if you get on, and this is sticky, if you get onto a computer and you cannot connect your USB to save your life, this is a place you come to look at this part, because what this is that in the older days, if you guys have all experienced problems actually connecting, tethering, right? And it's most of the time it's USB related. You're either the USB port on your camera is off, the USB cable is off, the USB port on your computer is off. It's usually that's where the problem is. So people, in the old days, it used to be, or at least and it's still true to this day, everybody writes their own USB driver. So Canon writes their own way to connect their cameras to computers. And then Fuji does their own, and then Nikon does its own. None of those are the same. They are all their individual flavor. They do the same thing for their respective cameras. But it used to be, the conventional wisdom was, if you were having trouble, you would come in here and you would turn off every single, so I shoot Canon, so I don't need to have any of these other ones on, so I'm going to turn all of these off, and that hopefully this way my camera will actually not have so much problem. It can work. The problem with this is, though, this is sticky. So if I leave this like it is and I don't go back to my defaults and somebody connects a Nikon camera, no matter what you do, it will not tether to Capture One because you've turned it off. You've said, I don't want this to be on. So this becomes really dangerous, but it's a great place to come and check to make sure that you're okay here. So there's other things that you can check in here, like this focus slider. Nobody really understands what this is, to be perfectly honest with you. It's something that's been developed. I mean, what is focus really? But if you don't like the color of your focus warning, you can actually come in here and change it. You just click on the color, change it, blah, 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 blah. There's other things that you can do in here, but we're not going to deal with that part right now. So anyway, back to this part. I've actually reset this image now to its beginning. I've turned on my exposure warning, so now we can come down to high dynamic range. So the way most people, if you don't have an exposure warning on and you say, well, I don't have any detail in this wall back here, you can just grab this highlight warning and start to drag it down, and you'll see as you drag it down enough, you start to bring in detail in these in the highlight parts, but there's no way to really measure what's really being brought back in. Am I still missing it somewhere else on the wall? All of that kind of stuff. So the way most people will work this, again, I double clicked on that to change to reset it to 0. I'm going to click on my exposure warning. This happens live. So now you can take your highlight warning and pull it down, and you can just watch the red disappear. So again, I'm going to crank mine back up until I just get rid of that part. I've got a pretty bad lag in my computer right now because I'm running Zoom and OSB and I'm recording shit. But it's just a way to go in, and you'll see now if you double click on my face that there's still parts of my hair that are still blowing out, that kind of stuff here. But this is how you actually adjust that part. Now, the same thing holds true for shadows. Again, you can push things in the other direction. This is a way to nuke more shit out, so it goes both ways. Then highlights and blacks do the same thing, but they only are really impacting the extreme ends. So you're pulling your white point in and or your black point in. I typically do not use any of these tools. Now, you do have highlight recovery also in Camera Raw, which will function both in Photoshop and in Lightroom. All right, I'm going to turn this exposure warning off. We are almost through the editing part of this in terms of exposure, that kind of stuff. If you open up levels, levels is actually a little bit, it works the same way it does in Photoshop, but what you find in levels that actually happens is the way it's controlled is a little bit different. So you'll have points up at the very top. Again, the image of me is a pretty good one to actually have in this. If you take the point, so I'm going to work on the black point area first, and you'll see this is a mapping of it. Now you see the same sort of thing in Photoshop, but what ends up happening is it's a set of numbers and sliders, and so it's a little bit different here. If you take the black point slider that is the bottom and at the far left edge of this histogram, and you click and you push it forward, what you're saying is you are remapping everything from 0, in my case I drug it up to 34, everything from 0 up to 34 gets remapped down to 0. If you pull this back, again, it's reset to normal. If instead you grab the top one and you drag it in this direction, you are reducing the contrast, because now you're saying you want everything in the image that was at 0 black, you want that remapped to a 34. Again, this is a scale of 0 to 255, so it simply completely opens it up. Again, I can click and pull this back to reset it. You can reset your midpoint, and again, your midpoint is a brightness adjustment. It tends to leave your highlights and shadows alone. It primarily is affecting the 3/4, mids, and quarter tones. So that's what this one is. Again, if you double click on this, you can actually type in 0 to zero this out. However, if you go to grab the top one, you cannot adjust this because this is mid-tone mapping. you've got to have the top one is stuck always at midtone. There would be no reason to do it any other way. Highlights work the very same way. You can click on the lower highlight and you can bring it back to make more highlights. So what I'm here now, I'm saying I pulled it back to a 228. I'm saying everything from 228 to 255 should be 0, or I mean should be completely 255, completely whited out. Then I can also lower contrast this way. This is not how you want to restore highlight detail though. So at any rate, questions about any of this? Okay, you can collapse that. Oh, just a really quick note on this. In levels, just like in Photoshop, you can do it for the entire RGB group as a group, or you can separate it and do just the green channels, just the blue channels, and just the red channels. Right here, I'm going to collapse this group. I'm going to open up curves. You've got just a regular curve here. One of the nice things about this, though, just to point out here, and it works the very same way curves work in Photoshop. There's no difference in this. If I click the midpoint and push it up, it'll actually make it lighter. Pull it down, it'll make it darker. You can tear points off just like you can in Photoshop. If you want to put on an S-curve, you push up your highlights and pull down. This is how you build contrast in here. You can pull these points off. The distinction that should be made though between this is that here you have an RGB setting and then you've got your red, green, and blue individual channels, but you've also got Luma. And if you click on Luma, what this curve will do, if you know anything about how curves work in Photoshop, if you're in RGB and you actually change any of the tone, it not only changes the color, but it changes the saturation and the contrast both. If you want that left alone, it's basically like doing a blending mode in Photoshop where you're saying you're using a blending mode that you only want luminosity changed, not saturation or color. So if you click on this, when you actually now move this stuff around, I'll do a contrast curve again, you'll actually see it doesn't impact the saturation or the color of my image. It's just a contrast curve. Whereas if I do the same thing in RGB, it will give me the same contrast in my luminosity, but it will also change my hue and saturation. Are we good on this part? Okay, I'm going to skip over the color editor because that's where we're going to spend a lot of time for the rest of the part. I'm also going to skip over color balance. If you open up black and white, this is just the black and white tool. If you click on enable black and white, this works just like it does in Photoshop. You can actually change what you think is color in an image. This is a bad image to do this with, so I'm going to change this to a different image. If everybody can look through our image and find the chalk, it's a box of pastel chalks. If you can find this, we'll be doing a lot of work with this guy, but it's just easier to see what the black and white adjustment layer part is doing. Are we good on this part? Okay, so you can click on enable black and white. You can see this actually goes to black and white, but Capture One understands that there's color still underneath this. So if you turn off black and white really quickly, just to reorient yourself, the blues are kind of in the middle here and the pinks are right kind of here. So I'm just going to work on those two things. So enable black and white again. So the pinks probably fall somewhere in this red range right here. If you click this and start to push it down, you'll see that the group in here that was considered that Capture One is considering to be reds gets made darker or lighter. So you can go in and you can modify color ranges in black and white by doing this exact same thing. And again, remember the yellows were in this group as well and sort of in the middle part if I drag them down. But it's also, you don't get to pick these ranges. That's the only problem that I have with this part right here. But you don't get to pick them in Photoshop either. When you put on a black and white adjustment layer, you get this same mix of stuff right here. So anyway, I'm going to unclick enable black and white and collapse that. The advantage to knowing that this exists is that you'll have art directors who, if your destination is black and white, they will not look at a color image when you're actually shooting tethered. They will insist on seeing it black and white. Now, the only way you can have a black and white raw file is if you have a black and white camera that shoots a black and white raw file. If every other camera that shoots black and white, again, you cannot edit a raw file. You can develop it, and you can develop it into a black and white, but you cannot change a color raw file into a black and white file without destroying it. The next one down is clarity. Clarity is the same here as it actually is in Photoshop. There's different methods. All this is about strength, and again, what it is clarity is a mid-tone contrast. So unlike the contrast that exists up here in the exposure, this contrast up in here, this actually pushes everything towards the ends. It's much more aggressive. This clarity tends to really lay off your quarter tones and your high and your three-quarter tones, and it tends to really focus more on your mid-tones to make them more contrasty. So it doesn't. It tends to not block up your shadows. It tends to not blow out your highlights, but it tends to give you more contrast in your mid-tones, which creates more detail because you are creating more difference between pixels that are very close to one another in color. If you make them different enough in tone, they appear to be sharper, anyway, that's what's going on in here. You can collapse that now. Dehaze is exactly what it's supposed to be. Now this is a great one. If you guys end up with flare in an image for some reason, or you have fog in an image, that's what dehaze comes in. Again, Photoshop has got the same one. They all work very different ways, slightly different ways, but this is how you would attack that problem. Again, this is very specialized stuff. And then finally you have vignetting in here, and vignetting works the very same way. I like the vignetting in here a little bit better, but Photoshop really allows you to edit the shape more. This just gives you a drop-down menu. You can do either circular on crop, or elliptical on crop. So if you know anything about how vignetting works, well, we can do a vignette. So we're going to grab the vignetting part, and we're just going to grab the slider and pull it down. You'll see it's starting to make my edges darker. The thing is that if I were to crop this image right now, just for these center parts right here, I would eliminate that vignetting. That's what this elliptical on crop means, is that if I crop this thing, it will bring the vignetting into my new crop. If you don't want that part on there, you actually have to then do one of these versions that does not have that. Again, this circular one doesn't have it, won't change on the cropping part of that. I'm going to then double click on this to get out of this. I'm going to collapse the vignetting group. And now would seem like another good time for a break, because we are going to jump into color after this, and this you guys need to bring your A game to the color part in here. It is incredibly deep. It's incredibly. It's really. You want to know this. Is all I'm going to try to say in this. You want to know this. I've got 3 o'clock. Make it a hard 10. I'll see you at 3:10. I'm going to jump in. So hopefully everybody does have the chalk thing still opened up. That's where we're going to start on all of this. I'm going to go back into my adjustment panel. I'm going to come down to the area that's, I'm going to go ahead and collapse my curves part, and we're going to go to the color editor. So, okay. What am I holding on a second for? Yeah, okay. So your screen may look a little bit different. Your color editor may look a little bit different here. It's probably because yours is set to the basic color editor part. So I'm going to click on the basic color editor, and we're going to take a look here. So to start this, I want to make sure that this image actually doesn't have any adjustments already made to it. So I'm going to come up to the reset menu up at the very top. Again, I don't want to just reset color. I want to reset everything. For all I know, I've gone in here and done some exposure adjustment and all this. So anyway, up at the very top, the reset button that's at the top, the really big one, click on that, and it will actually return your image to the base. So again, there's no adjustments that have been made on this guy at all. And that's how I want to start. So then in the color editor, you'll see that you actually have 3 tabs that run across the top. You've got a basic tab, you've got an advanced tab, and then you've got one that's called skin tone. We are going to look at all 3, albeit briefly, at the basic one. So in the basic tab, how do I do this? Yeah, okay. At the basic tab, these are pre-assigned colors that, or color ranges that Capture One has just devised. So to see what I mean by that, there's a color picker that's at the very bottom of this thing. It looks like a little eyedropper. If you click on the direct selection color picker tool and come over, and I'm actually going to pick the blues that are sitting up here at the very top. That's what I'm going to go after to begin with. So If you look at the number of pastel chalks that are at the top, I'm going to click right in the middle of the second from the right one. If you guys want your screen to resemble mine, you want to click on the same thing. I'm going to click on this to actually select a color range in here. So this is what you need to know about the way color works in Capture One, is that for the most part, there are global controls that you can use in here, but for the most part, you are selecting color ranges and then manipulating those color ranges. And this is you can do very similar stuff in Photoshop. It's just that Capture One really leverages this as the way to work. They're not, again, if you want to go in and use curves to actually change the color of something, you can do that. We've already gone through the curves thing. That will be more in the exposure part. But this is really more about finite, or really finessing color, as it were. So anyway, I've clicked on this blue, but the problem is that I cannot really tell what range it is. Now you'll see there are 8 colors that run across the top of this. This is picked a color range. But it's just blue. I don't know what really has been picked and what hasn't been picked. So if you want to see what hasn't been picked, we are going to have to go to a different place. But for right now, if you take the hue adjustment slider up at the very top of this, so it's right underneath those little patches, and drag it all the way to the left, you will see that there's a very subtle change in this. If you go all the way to the right, more of a change. But this will give you some idea of what has actually been picked. But it's a really blunt instrument, I think. If you double click on the hue to change it, we're going to grab the saturation and drop it all the way down. And now you can really see what has been picked. So all of those colors that are sort of in the middle that just went gray, that's the range that's been picked. You'll see that all the pinks and the magentas and the yellows and the oranges and the browns and all of that remain untouched. So this is the control that we get here. The problem that I have with this is that I don't get to pick the color range. Capture One picks it for me. But for some people who don't want to go any deeper than this, this works fine for them, and this will be good enough for them, and that part will be great. So, but I'm going to show you. That's why we're spending so little time here. I'm going to double click on the saturation to get out of this, and we're going to go to the advanced color picker. Now the advanced color picker is going to allow us to work in a more advanced way and actually really control what we're seeing in here, what we're not seeing in here, all of that kind of stuff. So to see how the advanced one works, again, you'll notice that there is still a targeting adjustment tool. Again, it looks like a little eyedropper at the very bottom. If you click on this little eyedropper, again, it's got to be highlighted. So mine was highlighted. I clicked on it. It's now not highlighted. So I'm going to click on it again. And I'm going to hit that same spot up here in the blues. I'm going to click on this part right here. And now what you see is that actually gives you on the color wheel an indication of what really is going to be picked in all of this. So this is a typical color wheel. We haven't really talked about color in this class a lot, so I'm going to open up something else really quickly first. So bear with me 1 second. So this is what we are basically looking at. And this color wheel right here is oriented the exact same way that it is in Capture One. What's important to know about this color wheel, though, is that I'm going to get rid of all that type so that you actually see this thing. What's important to notice, but then I can't point to it. So what's important, oh, fuck me. This is just a cascade of possible fuck-ups now. I can't get out of here. What's the keyboard shortcut to change applications? Oh, I got there. All right, hang on. I think I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Okay, I'm not making that mistake again. So the color wheel right here. So again, as you go around the edge of the color wheel, you have changes in hue. So at 3 o'clock we have red, at 1 o'clock we have yellow, at 11 o'clock we have green, at 9 o'clock we have cyan, at 7 o'clock we have blue, at 5 o'clock we have magenta. The thing to notice about this color wheel is it does not contain brightness. You don't see any whites or blacks in here. This is, again, if you were going to do brightness, you would actually have to take the color wheel, drop it on its side, and add a third dimension. This third dimension, if you think of this as the globe or the world, the third dimension would be brightness. So as you went up from the center of the equator, the center of the Earth, as it were, up to the North Pole, it would get lighter. You would eventually hit white, and then the opposite, if you go down to the South Pole, you eventually will hit black. That is missing in the color wheel here. It's also missing in the one in Capture One. All they're really concerned right now are about color ranges. So again, around this outside is hue, but the thing that's important about this is that in the very center of this is what they're doing here is they're taking complementary colors. And as you move from this outer edge, which is the most saturated, to the middle of this, in the middle point of this, yellow, which is complementary color of blue, if you mix equal amounts of those, you land right here in the very middle. And in the very middle right here, you have neutral gray. So the thing that you need to remember about this, specifically for Capture One's color wheel representation, is that this area that is close to the very center of it is very desaturated. The area that's on the very edge here is the most saturated, and then the wherever you are around this color determines hue. So we get hue in this, and we get saturation, but we are missing brightness. So I'm going to quit out of this so that doesn't happen again. I'm going to go back in here. So that is exactly what has happened in this scenario right here. I'm going to click on this guy again. Click on my blue. So this is the range that it's actually selected for me right here. So what you can see, just to understand what's happening here, this little white dot that sits in the very middle, that is the exact color that I picked. But now the shape in here, this sort of like, it's not really a triangle, whatever. I'm sure that there's some geometric term for this, four-sided thing, whatever. This is all of the colors that are being picked. However, you'll see that it goes beyond this. So the color goes beyond this. What is going on beyond this, all the colors that are inside of this geometric shape have been fully selected. But as you start to go from this area on the edge, as it fades out, this is called roll-off. And what roll-off is that it means that as we start moving away from the fully selected colors here in the middle, it fades off, but it fades off slowly. You don't have this sharp line where it's just like, okay, this color is in, and then the color right next to it is out. That's not what happens. It's a soft selection. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? This part matters. Then saturation also matters. So the areas that are the least saturated, that are outside of that little area right here, have not been selected. They're in the roll-off, but they have not been fully selected. The area that's up here, that's the most saturated of this, has also got a roll-off. Here, though, we can get a better preview of what has really been selected so that we can really control this. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your color editor, there is a thing that says View Selected Color Range. You need to put a check mark next to that. When you put that check mark next to it, everything that is not in this color range is turned to grayscale. Everything that is in the color range is actually left in color. Then you can actually come back up to your color wheel, and we can change this. We can modify this. So for instance, I am missing blue colors that are sitting right in this area right here. Now, I'm suspicious that they are more cyanic colors. So if we take a look at all of this range right here, I want to make sure that I'm selecting everything. I also don't have saturation here that I'm nervous about. You can actually control all of these. So I'm going to click on the saturation part first. So please do this with me. I'm going to click on this edge, and I can actually change the shape of this. And you will see it's impacting the colors here. These really super saturated blues that are right here just got deselected. If I then actually grab those and pull them back out, these come selected again. If you want to just automatically select the entire saturation range, you can come in here and actually pull these things out, or go back down to the bottom where you said View Selected Color Range, and there's this little triangle thing right here. If you click on this, it automatically expands this color saturation range to get all the desaturated color in this range as well as all the saturated versions. Now, I'm still missing color that exists right here, so I am temporarily going to turn off the View Selected Range, and I can see here that these things are they don't have any color at all. They're not. This is not a problem. It's not falling out of my range. There simply is no color here at all. So I'm going to turn this back on so that we can actually take a look. You can modify your range right now. So let's say that you are thinking that, well, there is more color around here that is not being selected that I want to be. You can change the shape of this. So if you hover over this top handle, the one that's really at, in my case, it's about 9 o'clock, you can click on it and you can extend this range. So unlike the predetermined ranges that Capture One has in the basic, this allows me to extend the range. So let's say I really not only want to affect the blues, but I want to grab the cyans and the turquoises as well. This is how you would actually do it. Let's say that I also want to extend my range into the more deeper blues and heading kind of into the more violet ranges. You'll see I'm beginning to pick these up right here. This is all controlled in this part right here. The smoothness slider that's sitting on the very top of this is what controls your roll-off. So in the smoothness slider, you can click on this and you'll see as you start to pull it in and say, I don't want any smoothness, I want a really sharp edge selection, it's going to fall off really quickly, you would set your smoothness to 0. The default is 20, but you can extend the smoothness range to actually capture more color if that's what you're trying to do. So all of these things have an impact on this. I'm going to double click on that to reset this. You can shift the entire color range by grabbing this center point right here and simply rotating it. It will stay the same size, but you'll see now that you are picking completely different ranges. Now, I don't think this has a whole lot of purpose or reason, because for me, it would be much smarter to just use the color picker to pick another range. So I am going to go back. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. It does reset this guy, so I've brought back to this part. So at this stage of the game, you can turn off this color view selected range. And again, in the controls that are underneath here, now we can actually shift the hue. So I'm going to shift the hue down or all the way up. You'll see that this is a very subtle shift. This is not like shifts of hue in Photoshop. What this will do is this does shifts in 30-degree increments. So it's 30 degrees plus or 30 degrees minus. That is 60 degrees total out of the 360 possible changes that you could make. But again, this is putting guardrails on that so people don't do these wildly stupid things. That doesn't mean that you can't do wildly stupid things in here. It just, Capture One forces you to take more steps to do it. We'll look at that in just a second. I'm going to double click on this hue to zero it back out, and I'm going to just boost the saturation on this guy. And you can see, again, this saturation boost in here is getting pretty neon, right? So this is how you can control things. You can actually change the lightness in the sky as well. You can make things lighter, you can make things darker here, but it's all restricted to that color range. So I'm going to zero both of these guys out again. So is this making sense to what's going on to everyone? So you remember I told you that you could actually do consecutive versions of this. So I am going to actually take the hue and I'm going to shift this, and what I'm doing is I'm shifting this in the direction of the purples and the reds. So it's actually pushing it in this direction. This color picker now though is cumulative. If you take a look right here, you will see that there is this first color point that we established, and that the only change that I've made in this is this 30-degree hue. So I've changed this. This is what delta means, is change. H means hue. Again, saturation and lightness. Those are the things that are controlling here. I can come back up, and with my targeting adjustment tool, I can click on that same blue area again. It gives me another new selection of color range, and I can actually take this one off again and crank this up another 30 degrees. You can see this is now cumulatively pushing this further than I would be able. This is now a 60-degree adjustment because I've got two 30-degree adjustments here. Is this making sense to everyone what's going on? If you uncheck one of these, you will see that it undoes that adjustment. It goes back to it, and then if you click on, it will bring it back again. You can get rid of these adjustment layers, these sample points. You can click on the minus part right down here. It will actually get rid of it, and this goes back to my original one. Now, this is an old bug that's existed in Capture One forever, so I'm going to see if they've fixed it now. If you turn on your view selected color, you can see that this is now still looking like I've shifted the hue on this. Again, this would be zeroing my hue out. This is shifting my hue to 30 degrees, and you see it right here. I'm going to do the same trick again, though. I'm going to pick this color point a second time. I'm going to click on it again, and I'm going to crank the hue over again. But now you get the same shift that happened originally. And so they have not fixed this bug. So this is not a cumulative range right now. This is actually not building a cumulative range right now. And the reason it's not building this cumulative range is because I have this view selected color range on. If you want to push this thing as far as it went before, you remember these things went almost purple. If you want to do it before, you cannot have this thing turned on. So I'm going to get rid of this guy again so that you guys see what I mean, and believe me, I'm going to now click on this without my view selected color range on. I'm going to click on this and then again push the hue all the way across, and you can see these things are starting to get purplish in them. So if you really want to push your hue as far as you cannot have this in view selected color range enabled when you do it. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, we good on this part? Okay, we're going to jump into a different image right now. So if you scroll down, there's another image in here. It's the one of the sort of like pigments. Yeah, this is the one that I actually want to sort of like go after part right here. So you can see here, I've actually got some color points that are already down. I've got something that's here. Again, I want to reset this because I've already got, in my case, I've already got adjustments, and yours may have my adjustments as well. So go ahead and just click the reset button that's up at the very top, and that gets rid of all the color points. It gets rid of any adjustment layers that we've got here. We are going to go after selecting this blue part here. So let's say I want to change its color, or I want to make it lighter or darker or whatever. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to grab the targeting or the color picker, the direct color selection tool, and I'm going to just click somewhere here in the middle. And you can see it selects my range for me. But I want to see what this range really is. So I'm going to click on the view selected color range, and you can see everything goes blue, and it actually, I mean everything, it changes its color here. And this is actually a pretty good selection. So let me try something here really quickly, guys. I'm going to reset this one more time. And I'm going to try, I'm just looking for a way to see how you really control the range of all of this stuff. So I'm going to pick the green one here, and I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to try the yellow one. Yeah, the yellow one will actually give me some. Okay, yeah, the yellow one looks pretty good here. So again, just do a reset up at the very top. So click on the very top reset button at the very top, and then come over, and we're just going to select the yellow range. I do have the view selected color thing turned on, but what you see is, ooh, I didn't mean to do that. What you see is it's selected a good part of the yellow, but it's also selected, this is part of the red up here as well. This is still in my range. Now, I don't want this to be in my range. I want to control what I really see in here. So to do that, we need to manually adjust this color part. I am going to go after, I'm going to go ahead and expand my range. You can see it's got the full saturation part, but it doesn't have the more desaturated elements of this. So I'm going to click on the little pie wedge at the bottom to expand that range. You could just simply click and drag it down. That actually made my problem up here worse. But now you can see this color range that's up here is really in this red group in here. So I'm going to grab my red slider right here. I'm going to click and I'm going to start to drag it towards my source point. And you can see I'm getting rid of this part that's happening up in here. So I'm going to continue to push this until that all goes away. And I'm pretty close here right now where it all goes away. But you need to worry about, is this encroaching on anything that's in this yellow range right here? I don't think it is, but we'll pick it up here in a second. We'll just see. I'm also going to see if just moving my entire saturation, my entire color point, hue point, won't also get me there a little bit more. And I don't really pick up a whole lot of that. What's causing me the problem is this roll off. This is now still going outside of my image. So again, remember, roll off is controlled by smoothness. So I want to bring my smoothness down as much as I can to get rid of this, but hang on to as much as I can so that I don't have these really hard, sharp lines that are right here. So I'm going to grab my smoothness slider and start to pull it back. And again, I'm watching this area right here. I want this all to go grayscale. And you'll see that you're also narrowing down this roll-off area that's right here. So I'm going to continue to push this back. And it gets pretty close here. I'm actually feeling pretty good about this. I'm going to tighten this up even a little bit more. And now I feel like I've got a relatively good representation of this. I've virtually eliminated all of this. There's a little speck or two in there or whatever. We will talk about how to deal with this in just a second. But I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm going to turn off my view selected color. And you can see that it did a really good job of picking this guy. So now if I actually change the saturation on this slider right now and pop it up, you'll see it doesn't do a whole lot. Again, the saturation slider here is a little bit more calm. If I crank it all the way down, it makes it just white. It also shows me I'm missing something in here. But anyway, is this sort of making sense what's going on here? So this is how you can physically go in, actually go in, visually go in, and really adjust the exact thing that's being selected in this. You can see I'm missing some of the range that's actually up in here. It's probably because I've pulled my roll off too much, so I'm going to pull my smooth this back up again. I've probably got to pull this out again a little bit more. It picks this up again. This is now a part of it, but I've also reintroduced a problem in here. We're going to show you how to fix that part next. So, is this making sense, everyone, what's going on so far? Questions about this part? Okay, yes?
Is there a way to adjust the smoothness on this outside?
No, there's not. But, again, the next thing that I show you is a way to probably control all of this. Okay, so we are going to reset again. So click up on the top and just reset this again. So to give yourself more control of this, they have added layers and masks to Capture One. So if you open up the layers and masks panel that's sitting up here, you'll actually see up at the very top, there's a thing that says image layer. One second, I'm going to make the screen a little bit brighter. It says image layer right here. This is what we're currently working on. We don't have any other layers in here. We've just got, this is the original image. But we can add layers in here. Now this is the tricky thing about layers here. If you come up to the layers menu where it says that little plus, there's a little drop down menu. If you click on this, don't just click on the plus ever, because you don't know what you're really going to get. There are different types of layers. So there is an empty adjustment layer, there is a new filled adjustment layer, there is a new clone layer, and a new heal layer. The clone and healing I save for Photoshop. I don't do that part here. But I do work with these empty adjustment layers and these filled adjustment layers. This is the confusing thing about Capture One relative to Photoshop. And the confusing thing is this, is that in Capture One, something that is masked is actually showing. So when they talk about a masked layer, it's not hidden, it's actually showing. Whereas I always think of a masked layer in Photoshop as being something that is hidden and not showing. It's the exact opposite. So what you need to do is this. If you come up here to this drop-down menu and you click on this and you say, I want to add a new filled adjustment layer. So just click on this part, a new filled adjustment layer. It doesn't look like anything has changed, but this new filled adjustment layer is something that's very different in here. So in this new filled adjustment layer, if you hit the M key, you will see that your whole image is covered in red. That is a layer mask that is on your image, and therefore any changes that I make to this will be made to the entire image. Say what? Hit the M key to see it. If you hit the M key a second time, it will be hidden, but it's still in effect. I'm going to throw this layer away. To get rid of this layer, click on the minus. Then we're going to add a different layer on here. We're going to click on the plus again, and we're going to do a new empty adjustment layer. And now when you hit the M key, you will see nothing happens because there is no mask on it. However, you can paint with a mask. So if you come up to these little tools up at the very top, there is a draw mask. Then there's an artificial intelligence mask. There is a magic mask. The magic mask works sort of like the selections and tool, the quick selection tool in Photoshop. They kind of work like that. The AI mask, again, they're trying to introduce elements of AI in here. It tries to analyze your image and pick out the right edges for your mask, all that kind of stuff. You can do all of that. I think that this is, in a lot of ways, overkill. And the only reason I say that is that we've already got a very solid selection based on color. And these things are actually going to then continue to try to add things like, a subject selection or a background selection. I mean, they're trying to compete with Photoshop. So that's basically what's going on in here. These are the healing tools right here. And then these are the modification tools for layer masking. Again, we will see what this looks like in just a second. But to start this whole process, I'm actually going to throw this layer away again. So I'm going to add another layer. So again, click on this drop down. I'm going to add a filled adjustment layer. So you can see I've got the M key enabled, so it's showing the whole thing. I'm going to click the M to unshow that. What you need to realize, we're going to jump out just for a second of color. These layers control everything. They control color, they control exposure, they control anything that you want to do on this. So temporarily, we are going to go back up to the exposure control. We are going to click, what you'll notice, you'll see that there's a little brush icon next to this guy right now. That's going to allow me to actually use this on a layer. It knows I'm on a layer. So I'm actually going to click and say, I want to increase the exposure. Oh, let's do this. Let's do saturation instead. I'm going to increase the saturation. And you'll note, exposure actually seem more obvious to me. I'm going to change the exposure and the saturation on all of this. And you see it impacts all of your image. If again you hit the M key, you'll see that that's because the mask is on the entire image. However, let's say that it nuked out this area right in here of this magentas, and I don't want that to be a part of this. You can click on this erase mask button right here. You can click on this. Then you'll come over and you'll see that you have a brush, and the brush has actually got two circles with a minus in the middle. The minus in the middle, if you hovered over this thing long enough, you would see you get a little drop-out menu. It says erase mask, and that's what I'm going to do is erase the mask. But those two circles are showing you the fall off on your brush. This is a relatively soft brush. To control your brush, you hold down the control key and click, and you will get this pop-up menu. This is how you can control the size of your brush. This is how you can control the hardness. Now remember, the harder your brush, the less there is an edge. That's why those two circles are coming together. If you go all the way to the other side, to the softest of brush, you see the little dotted circle that's in the middle? That is going to be 100% painted. But as you start to move from the dotted circle to the solid circle, that indicates the soft area of your brush. Does that make sense? You guys have worked with brushes in Photoshop enough. You should know this part. Yep. Then you also have an opacity slider in here that you have in Photoshop, and you have flow as well. So opacity controls, no matter how much you're brush stroking back and forth, it will only lay down. If we put it at 50%, it'll only put down 50% of this brush. What flow does is that flow controls over time. Is this making sense, everyone? Is everybody comfortable with opacity and flow, or should we go over that? We're going to go over this because this matters, because this is how you really use this tool. I'm going to jump into Photoshop really quickly and hope this doesn't crash my computer. Because I want it to be part of the video. Oh, because it's where everything is, and I know, and so yeah. Okay, so I'm in Photoshop right now. I'm just going to create a synthetic blank file. So a brand new file. I'm going to make it in inches, and I'm going to do 10 inches wide by 8 inches tall, and I'm going to do it as 300 pixels per inch, just a standard file, and I'm going to do it in Adobe RGB, and I'm going to say OK. So then my foreground color is black. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make it a larger brush. I'm using the bracket keys that are just to the right of the P key. The bracket key that's immediately to the right of the P key makes your brush smaller. The bracket to the right of that makes it larger. Those are the same keyboard shortcuts in Capture One. I'm going to click and make this a completely hard brush. Mine is a completely hard brush. And I'm going to set my opacity at 100% and my flow at 100%. And I'm just going to do a line across the top. And this is what you would expect. So it's a black. It paints it solid. It doesn't matter. Nothing else changes. If I drop my opacity down to 50%, then what's going to happen is I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag across, and you see it lays down 50% of black ink, which is middle gray. That's what I'm painting down here. But look what happens is I go back and forth. If I stay inside the lines, I don't build any density at all. I can go back and forth all day long, and I do not build any density. When I let go of my mouse and then start again, what this does is this looks at the underlying color, which is 50% gray, and it compares it to the ink I'm putting down, which is 100% gray, and this puts it right in the middle. So you would think that because I added 50% to 50%, this should be black. It does not work that way. It does 50%, it does the difference between the ink that I'm putting down, which is black, and this middle gray. So, but if I go back and forth here, again, I don't build any more density than in the beginning. If I let go of my mouse again and start this again, I'm eventually getting towards black, but this still is not black right now. This is reading 30s up in here. So that's opacity. Flow is based on time. So in flow, if I take my flow way down, and you've got to get flow way down. You can't work with flow at like 50%, or it just takes off too fast on you. You might as well leave it at 100%. But I'm going to take mine down to 2%, and now look what happens. I'm going to start just dragging back and forth, and it builds density over time. So this is a way to actually continue. I've never lifted my mouse off the cursor. It's a way to build over time. Does that make sense to everyone, what's going on? Okay. So I'm going to quit Photoshop. We do not need to save that. So that works the same way in here. So if you hold down again your control key and click, you will get this flyout menu. You can change the opacity and the flow. For the time being right now, I'm going to leave them the same. And then I'm going to say OK to this. Click on this. I'm going to, again, you can use, I'm just going to paint along my mask edge right now, and you can see I have pulled that whole part back. If you hit the M key, you'll see what we just did. I just removed the mask from that area. So the saturation control that I hit right here and the exposure thing that I hit right here are removed from this. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, I'm going to hit the M key again. To preview what your exposure thing is doing, if you come up over the reset button, this is true for all of the tools that have a reset button, hold down your option key and click on the reset. It will temporarily turn it off, then let go again and it'll put it back on. So this is your before and after by just holding down the option key. And you can see that by removing that area of my mask, it's actually taken this adjustment control off of this layer. Does that make sense to everyone? But also, if I come up to this layer and I uncheck the check mark, it turns off my adjustments. They are no longer on. They're still saved, but they're no longer there. So this is the way that you can actually really target and control areas of your image that you want to change the color in, pushing it or not pushing it or doing all the above. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? Are we good on this part? Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this filled layer. I'm going to turn it off. And let's find another image that we can do some work on. I have a lot of black and white images in here, don't I? Let's go back to the image of the pastel chalks. I am going to reset this image to its beginning. I am going to actually use this to refine where I'm actually doing the color part of this. So I'm going to start off again with adding a new layer, and I'm going to actually add a one that has got a full mask in it. So again, click on the little drop down menu, come down to new filled adjustment layer, so that when we do that, any of the changes that I make will be made to everything, and then I can go in and target or move stuff around or remove stuff from all of this. So now I'm going to come down to my color editor. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go after that same blue part that's up at the very top. I'm going to click on that. That gives me my typical range. I'm actually going to expand my range by clicking on the little pie piece. By the way, the other tools that are actually down here, if you click on the other pie, the thing that looks like the pie with the wedge cut out of it, it selects everything else. It's just an inversion of what you selected. So let's say you're selecting an area that you wanted to protect. I want to change everything but the blues. This is how you would do it. But I'm going to go back to the way it was before. So this has been expanded right now. And I'm going to saturate this. I'm going to much deeper saturation. I'm going to actually make it a little bit brighter. I'm sorry, that was smoothness, not brightness. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. And so this is now the adjustment that I've actually made on this. But what you'll see is if you come up to this new filled layer right now, I'm going to double click on this to rename it. So I can rename this and I can call it saturation or blue saturation SAT bright. Just something so it gives you some idea of what you're doing. If I go ahead and click on that, if I now uncheck this layer, you will actually see that nothing has changed in here. I did this actually before. The same thing actually happened to me before. So we are going to erase that, which actually erased everything that I just did. So for all I know, it's because this stupid view selected thing, color range, is actually on. We'll find out. So targeting adjustment tool, click on the blue range. Oh, wait, sorry. Command Z to undo that. Create a new layer. Again, a filled layer. With the targeting adjustment tool, click on the blue, expand it. I'm going to turn off this preview part, the view selected part. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, and I'm going to saturate it. And so that's what's happening in this guy right here. And now if I turn this layer on and off, it now turns it. So again, this view fucker thing down here, the view selected color range screws so much up. And it's like, yeah, well, it's a great preview to show me, but I don't want all this screwed up. But nonetheless, so now I'm going to rename my filled layer, and I'm going to call it, again, blue. Yes? Can I do what? You can watch the video. We're going to do it again for other things here, so just stay with me. Because we're almost done here. killed you guys already. So we're almost done here. And I've got a couple other things I need to show you, and then we're going to call it a day because I can only jam so much into your brain. But anyway, it's a way to begin with all this. So anyway, blue, the bright part in here, right? So again, this is going to be, I'm just going to hit the enter key. Again, if you turn this on and off, it'll actually change all this. If you hit the M key, though, you will see, though, that the mask is covering the entire image. So even though I selected that very small color range, it's affecting the entire image. However, I'm going to hit the M key again to undo that part. I didn't want it to affect these blues right here. I only wanted to affect these blues that are in this group right here. So I could try to screw around with my range, but the easier thing is to actually do it with a mask. So again, I'm going to select on the erase mask. I'm going to come over to this range of blues right here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit sharper because it's a little too soft. Control click, and again, I'm going to make it slightly harder. I tend to usually work with harder brushes anyway. Make my brush a little bit larger. Again, I'm using the bracket keys to do that. And then with the erase mask, I'm going to simply click and drag down here over this, and it gets rid of that adjustment. So if you hit the M key and look at your mask, this has been unmasked, which is allowing that color correction to be happening on that blue. Did this work for everyone? So again, hit the M key again to undo that. If you want to see what your mask really looks like, come up to the very top of the top of your screen. Just take a look at where I'm at. There's a series of icons that go across the top. You want to click on the one that's the little eyeball. And when this one actually comes on, you can actually say to it, I want you to display the mask as a grayscale. And this is what we are normally used to looking at. And so now you can see why this is called a mask. The area that I removed from it is actually black, and therefore it now works the same way it works in Photoshop. Does that make sense, everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay. I'm going to pick another image really quickly. We're going to go through 2 more images, guys, here, and then we're done. I have no idea why the crowns pixelates as bad as it does. It never did this before in any other version. But if you click on it, it's the thumbnail that's screwed up. It's not anything else. But it's the thumbnail that's actually just screwed up. I want to change the color of the yellow crowns in here. That's what I actually want to do in here. So I'm going to start out. I'm going to do this. Do a reset on this because I've already got parts of this done. I'm going to do a reset on this, so that I don't have any corrections on here at all. I am going to add a new filled adjustment layer. Darius, if you want to figure this one out, go to the new crowns. We're starting a whole new image, so if you wanted to know what this is, that's where we're going. There's a crown, there's the thing of crowns, although I just put this on, a layer on here, and I lost my entire image, so I don't know what that's about. Hang on. Oh, my view is still on grayscale. Sorry, thank you. Take this back to never display mask. Again, if you hit the M key, it'll display. So again, thank you. That's a really good one, because I was like, well, but the thumbnail's throwing me, and I don't know why this keeps happening. Is your thumbnail all fucked? Yeah, but it shows up just fine. So anyway, don't ask me. Anyway, so add new filled adjustment layer. And again, if you hit the M key now, you'll see that it shows the mask is on the whole thing, which is fine. So I'm going to hit the M key again to undo that part. I'm going to come down and click on the color picker. Again, I use this terminology for Photoshop. Yeah, that's what you just added. And you're fine. Hit the M key really quick. I'm going to make sure you added one. Yeah, and hit the M key again. So you've got a mask on the whole thing. You're right where you need to be. All right, so I'm going to grab the targeting, the direct selection tool, and I'm just going to click on this yellow crown that's right in the middle of the image. I'm just going to click on that, and it selects a range. I want to see what's really being selected, though. So I'm going to come down, and I'm going to click on this View Selected Color Range, and you can see everybody goes gray except for these orange crowns right in here. They're not quite gone. They're going to be part of my selection. I only want to change the yellow crowns. So I'm going to drag out all of my selection range. This hasn't gone completely. It's selected. It hasn't gone. I just want to show you that you can do this manually. You can click to get the entire saturation range. I'm going to click on the thing that's really close to the middle and simply drag down. And I'm also going to click on the one that's near the top and drag out. That's the same move as simply clicking on the pie-shaped wedge guy right here. So now this part's selected. So now I want to try to get rid of the orange parts of the crown that are being selected. So again, it's this slider on my color wheel right here. If I start to push it towards my point, it will actually start to get rid of more of that. And you can see it's doing a better job. It's sort of getting rid of that part as I get closer. I'm then going to try to get rid of the smoothness in the roll-off part by pulling it back. I'm trying to get this thing right here to go completely grayscale. That's my goal in all of this. So I'm pulling my roll-off back to try to get that part. And it does a fairly good job of this, but I've still got a problem that's happening right in here. I can't get rid of all of that. I can't get rid of, there's other things in here that I can't get rid of. So it's just like frustrating me. So I'm close enough in this though that I'm actually going to employ a layer mask instead of all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to accept this part, and we're going to do a radical shift. So I'm going to grab the hue and I'm going to drag it all the way to the left to make them green crowns. That's what I'm going to do in all of this. And you'll see it doesn't really impact the other ones a whole lot. So that's going to be a move on this. And I'm going to see if I need to refine this at all. I'm going to uncheck this naughty thing right here that's actually on. I'm going to come up to my layer, my filled layer, and I'm going to turn it on and off to see what it's really shifting and what it's really controlling. And I can say, okay, well, this worked out really well. I like what's happening there. You can still continue to adjust things that are on this layer. So if you wanted to pump the saturation of that green up, you can actually hit it and it'll pump this whole part up. Makes them more nuclear, fluorescent-y green, but you can actually do that part. And so this part is working pretty good. It hasn't hit, it's affected this little bit of this orange crown right here a little bit. So I'm going to grab the remove tool from this. I'm going to make my brush smaller. Again, the remove mask. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. And in this case, you can probably use what they call the magic tool here. Although the magic tool is really designed to add stuff. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to subtract stuff. So I'm just going to run it, make it much smaller. And then I'm simply going to run it down along the edge of this right here to eliminate the part that it was contaminating on that. And it works out really well. If you want to see what your mask, again, looks like, click on this and say, show me this in grayscale, and that's the line that I've actually put down. I'm going to go back to never display mask. So, but let's say I don't want these crowns that are on the outside to be changed in color. I can just mask them completely out. So I'm going to make my brush bigger, and I'm simply going to paint over these. It's not changing anything else in my image. I'm not changing any of these yellows or greens or any of that. I'm not changing any of those. I want this one to be yellow as well. And this one to be yellow as well. Boom. Yes? So no, but if you want to change the quality of your brush, so again, if you hold down the control key and click, you can not only control the size, but you can control opacity, hardness, and flow.
Yeah, but to use the brackets to just control the size.
That's just controlling size. So the bracket key that's next to the P key makes your brush smaller. The bracket key that's next to it, so the open bracket right next to your P key makes your brush larger. The closed bracket, which is the one just to the right of the open bracket, makes it smaller. Okay. Are there any questions about this part? Are we good on this part? So guys, we're going to do one more here. We're going to add another adjustment layer, a full one. So again, click on the little plus part here. We're going to add a new filled adjustment layer. And I'm going to go back up to my exposure range right here. And I'm going to make my exposure a little bit darker. I'm not going to make it darker. I'm going to make it more contrasty. I'm going to pump the contrast on this a little bit. And say, yeah, and then I'm going to bring my brightness down a little bit. That's what I'm going to do. Make it seem a little bit more intense, a little bit more saturated, and possibly pop my saturation slightly on this. But this, again, is pretty global. So, but now that's an adjustment that I've made in my exposure panel. If you come over and uncheck this, that control goes away, but the color shift is still there. If I uncheck the color shift, that goes away, but I can go back to my exposure shift and turn it back on. So by using layers, you can set up a layer to control color, another layer for exposure, another layer for white balance, another layer for dynamic range, another layer for curves, another layer for all of this. Gives you this flexibility and control in here. Is this working for everyone? Okay, so now I'm going to show you, for anybody in here who's actually works in Photoshop, especially the fashion and beauty people, the last thing I'm going to show you, it's the last thing that we're going to get to right now, guys. It'll be worth the wait. That's all I can say. One of the most difficult things to do in Photoshop is to smooth skin out, color variation, and so that's where we're going to go to next. So, pick the girl wearing the bra with sunburn. Again, reset this image just to make sure that well, I can see the reset button is not active. So mine doesn't have anything, but go ahead and reset yours. So to do this in Photoshop is a tricky thing. You can actually do color ranges in Photoshop and try to mask this part out. But this is a tool that Photoshop does not really have. And it's the last of the color range, of the color control tools. So if you come down here, it's called skin tone. However, this is misleading. It was originally developed for skin tone, but you can use this to control the color of anything. A lot of people do this when they're trying to work on green foliage. A lot of people do this when they're trying to work on lawns, when they're working on skies. This works really well for skies. So just keep in mind that just because it's called the skin tone thing doesn't mean that that's something that you actually care about or want to actually use in this. However, on this one, I'm actually going to start again with another layer, another adjustment layer. I'm going to do a full adjustment layer. So again, click on the adjustment layer up at the very top. Click on the plus little drop-down menu. We are going to do a filled adjustment layer so that all the work that I do is on this layer. If you hit the M key, you'll see that your mask is covering the whole thing, which that's exactly what I want on here. So then the way this tool works is this. So in the skin tool, you've still got a targeting adjustment picker, whatever you want to call this thing. They call it something else. But now if you take a look down here at the bottom, you still have smoothness, which controls the roll off of your selection. You still do have hue, saturation, and lightness, but now you've got three more sliders. You've got uniformity, hue, saturation, and lightness. So I'm going to explain what this all is right now. We are going to use this tool to pick a color in here, and what the color that I want to pick is I'm going to pick a color down here on her stomach. I'm going to pick something not right in the middle because that's kind of pretty highlight right there, but something that's sort of like right kind of in this area right down in here. I'm simply going to click and it will actually give me a color here. Now, if again you want to see the color that is selected, you can click on your view selected range, and anything that is not a part of this should have actually gone gray. Now, in theory, the white background has gone gray, but because it's white, it's already gray. You don't see any change in this. But we could narrow down this color range quite a bit, so I'm going to crank this range down to make it incredibly small. And I'm also going to drag the saturation way down just to try to get, and you can see that there's some gray that's showing up in her armpit right in here. There's not, I mean, the color in here is pretty consistent in here, but you can just see that this is actually working. So I'm going to uncheck that view selected color range. I'm going to get rid of the point that I just did. So I'm going to just reset the whole thing. So again, this is my reset button on the color editor right here. With the targeting adjustment tool, I'm going to click on that point again. So what this tool does, I'm going to completely expand this. I'm going to click on the complete expand the range. So again, the pie chart that actually will let you zip out to give you all the saturation. I'm actually even going to make this a little bit larger. I want to make sure I grab all of her skin. I don't want anything to not be selected. So I'm dragging this out. I'm making it a much larger range. Now in this case, there's no other color in here, so it doesn't really matter here. You wouldn't want to be as cavalier about this if you were really like doing the pastel crown thing again, that sort of stuff. But what's different about this that Photoshop doesn't have is this uniformity. So what uniformity does is that we have picked a point. Remember that little white dot I said is the target point? That little white dot is the exact color we picked on. All of this other stuff is every color that's nearby. However, what uniformity attempts to do is take all of this color range that I've got, all of the stuff that's in here, and move all of it to this single point right here. So it's going to make all of the hue of everything, this hue, the hue of this point, the saturation of this point, and the lightness of this point if I change those sliders. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab the hue slider and I'm going to drag it all the way up, and you will see that it eliminated the red in here. It's still got saturation in it. I'm going to grab the saturation slider and drag it all the way up. Now there is no more red in here at all, and I'm also going to do the lightness slider and drag it all the way up. Again, not the saturation, hue saturation of the amount, uniformity is what I'm working with here. And you can see it doesn't make everything like one single color, but it pulls everything into that direction. If you want to see the before and after, come up to the little reset button, hold down your option key and click, and you will see what is actually happening in here. You see I lose all sorts of dimension. Her arms, they all become flat because I'm basically trying to make them all one color. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on? Okay, the problem that I have with this is overkill. This is not what I really want to have happen here. So I'm going to leave them all the way up. I can then come back and paint this in a targeted way that really makes this tool useful for me. So to do that, come up to your layer. You need to actually select the layer, and then you're going to control click on this layer, and we're going to say clear the mask. Or I take it back, invert the mask. It's the same thing as clear. And you'll see it brings back all the sunburn. But the layer is still here, but if you hit the M key now, you'll see there is no mask on here. So I'm hitting the M key again. What? Clear. It's fine. Okay. Now I'm going to come up and use the paint mask tool. So this is the tool that you use to paint in changes. So I'm not subtracting from the mask, I'm actually painting in. So I'm going to click on this paint tool. The other way, if you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, the command click to do this, you can actually click right here, and this will allow you to control your settings. So in my setting, I'm going to keep this as a medium soft brush, so around a 50% softness brush. I'm going to leave the opacity at 100%, but I'm going to bring my flow down to like a 15. I'm going to bring it down kind of low so that I can scrub this in. And then I'm going to again hover over to my image, and I'm just going to start scrubbing across the sunburn. And then on the other side as well. Then a little bit of the sunburn up here. Now if you hit the M key to get your mask, you will actually see you have density of a mask. To even make it more evident, click on this little arrow at the top and say, show this to me in grayscale. And you can see in this area, I've made it almost completely white, which is a really strong correction. A little bit of correction up on the top of her chest, but not too much. This shows to me that 18 is probably still too aggressive in this. So again, but you get the whole idea here. When I'm typically doing flow in Photoshop, I am usually under 5. Does this make sense, everyone? All right, so I can turn this back on to never show display mask, and then just turn your fill layer on and off. Try and do that in Photoshop that quick. Impossible. So when we talk about skin in Photoshop, we'll do one last one really quickly. There's one of a girl on a green screen background. We can zoom way into that, double click on her face to just zoom in. And you can see that in this part, again, I've got some highlights that are on the top. I've got some other stuff that's happening around here. I don't have any adjustment layer that's actually going on here. This has been color balanced, so I'm going to go ahead and leave the color balance here. But I'm going to do the same trick. I'm going to use my skin tone slider. I'm going to click on the skin tone, and I want to pick a target. What color do I want her skin to really be? So I'm going to pick a color down here on her chest that's going to be something that's a little bit closer to normal. I am going to completely expand that range. Oh, sorry, hang on. I'm not going to do that. Command Z to undo that. I want to make a layer first. So again, I'm going to click on Layer, Add Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to add a Filled Adjustment Layer so that I can see what I'm doing. Grabbing the skin picker now. Again, I'm going to click on something lower down on her chest. I'm going to completely expand that range. I'm going to just do a real quick check to see the view selected color range on here, and you can see if you zip back out a little bit that the background's gone. Again, the rest of her hair, all of that is like, we're sort of like good in this range right here, although it has picked the range of her hair, and I don't like that part. But nonetheless, and then I'm going to try the same trick. I'm going to grab the hue, saturation, and drag it up, the uniformity, and the lightness. All three of them go up. And you can see what a weird thing that does to her face. It makes it really, I mean, it's like super flat face, right? Again, if you turn your adjustment layer on and off, you, again, don't see anything because, again, I left the view selected color range on when I made this. So throw the layer away, click and do your color sampler point down in the middle again. Make sure that this view selected range is, oh shit. I'm just trying too fast now. Command Z to undo that part, add a new filled layer first. Use the targeting adjustment tool to click on her chest, completely expand this range, open it up a little bit more in both directions. Take the uniformity slider and drag it, hue slider all the way across, the saturation all the way across, and the lightness all the way across. She is now like flattened out completely in this. If you hit the M key, I did fill this with a mask, didn't I? Okay, starting over again, resetting this tool, getting rid of the layer that I've tried to put on here. So starting from scratch, taking your time, add a new filled adjustment layer. On that layer it's been created. If you hit the M key, you should see it's completely covered. Hit the M key again, it goes away. Grab the targeting adjustment tool, click on a spot in the middle of her chest. Expand the color range completely, make it larger so that we grab everything. In the uniformity, not the regular adjustments amounts, but then the uniformity slider, change the hue, the saturation, and the lightness. And you'll see her skin takes on this really weird-ish color. That's okay. Again, in my layer mask, I'm going to hover over it, hold down the control key, click, and say clear the mask. Hit the then the regular masking, add masking tool. I'm going to open it up and drop its flow down to 5, which I think is a better place to do this. And then I'm going to come in to her face a little bit more. And then you can see areas here that I feel like are possibly, like the areas under her eyes. Like I would like to smooth that part out. So I'm going to zip in even a little bit more. And I'm just going to start working on her eyes with this layer mask. And I'm just going to start painting back and forth across it. And you can see that took that bag out. This is taking that bag out. And so now you can actually see this is the difference on and off. It's so much faster and easier doing this in Capture One than it is doing it in Photoshop. Is this making sense, everyone? Game changer. Questions about any of this? I know this is a lot. Spend time with the video, but guys, this is your ticket. I said this to you in the very beginning, and I'll say it to you again right now. If you can command this program, if you can learn this program inside and out so that all of this just as natural to you as anything else that you do, you can get a job in any major city in the world if you can speak the language. If you speak Russian, you can get a job in Moscow. If you speak Japanese, you can get a job in Tokyo. If you speak, you name it, French, Paris, Greek, Athens. I mean, wherever you want to live, you can get a job starting out and make okay money. You're not gonna make the money to buy General Motors. That's not gonna happen. But you can you can graduate from college and actually have a fucking job, not at Whole Foods or at Starbucks or wherever else. This is a skill that I can't stress how important this is. This is the only program that every professional studio in the world uses. This is it. It's not Lightroom. Everybody uses Photoshop too, don't get me wrong, but nobody uses Lightroom. If you walk into a studio where somebody's using Lightroom, run. Because you won't get paid. You're in a studio that somebody doesn't really know what they're doing, so they're not making any money, and they're never going to be able to pay you. Yes?
So you're talking about how this is all editing a raw file.
Yes.
So how do you keep these fingers if you want to say continue editing on
So that is exporting, which is our final thing, and we are not doing that today. That is going to be next week, or what? Next week we are not here. So the week after next, we will get, because do you really want to do another hour of this? No, believe me, everyone in this room would like jump on you and like, you know. All right, yeah, no, we're going to stop here. We will get into editing or exporting, basically. It used to be a completely separate panel. Now it's just considered exporting. But it's, again, like everything else in Capture One, it's deep. So you can do a lot with it, which makes it's a very good thing, but it's also, again, for if you're looking for somebody to just do a quick, easy, blah, 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 that doesn't help. Okay, one last thing I wanted to show you about this, though, I forgot to tell you, is that just, and again, you know, it doesn't matter, you can just see it right here. There is an opacity slider for all of your layers. And so if you want to back this off a little bit, again, I don't have a big change here. Let me go back to one where we actually did have a pretty big change in here. Yeah, this is the sunburn remove one. You can take this opacity slider and drag it back, so you can pull it all the way back, which means you're essentially turning the layer off, or go anywhere in between. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that there was an opacity slider to really fine tune this guy. And if there isn't anything else, any questions, anything? I'm going to stop the recording before I answer that.